I'm a Winter Park resident, and my nanny is missing. This is what's unusual. Is her purse is here.
Okay.
Her car's gone. Her purse is here, and nobody's heard anything from her since 11.
Chilling, methodical, and devoid of any regret. It's the kind of thing that gets marrow deep into your bones, no matter how far away you are from it. This is the man who changed the peaceful community forever, taking an ordinary day and turning it into a nightmare that no one would ever have dreamed.
A nanny goes missing. All that's left behind is her empty purse. The woman vanished while in the middle of her job in Winter Park.
This is Jennifer Fulford's story, a loving nanny, a good friend, an innocent woman whose life intersected with that of a monster. On September 27, 2017, she vanished from the home where she had worked for years, leaving only questions and an ominous feeling behind. What came next was a find so gruesome that even veteran investigators found it hard to put into words.
He is a man who believes he's been mistreated by the system, by everybody in his life. Jennifer Fulford died because this maniac wanted to air his grievances to the world.
And the man behind it all, he didn't flinch, he didn't run. He wanted the world to know what he'd done, and he wanted the world to know fear, which he was so intent on spreading. This case was not simply about crime. It was about terrorizing an entire community. That is what happens when evil is without conscience.
You committed the worst possible crime.
And so that morning began like any other. It was Wednesday, September 27th, 2017, and Jennifer Fulford knew exactly how she was spending her day. At about 7:15 or so, she drove her employer's son, Oliver, to school. By all accounts, it was a day like any other in the sleepy Winter Park neighborhood. After dropping off Oliver, Jennifer returned to the house and spoke briefly with her employer, Reed Berman. They reviewed the day's schedule. Nothing unusual. Jennifer had a dental appointment at 9, then a meeting with an art framer at the house. The rest of the day was ordinary, managing the house, running errands, picking up Oliver from school at 3:30. Reed had a breakfast meeting to get to, so they bid each other farewell. Nothing out of the ordinary, no indication that something terrible was brewing. But then things began to unravel later that afternoon. Out of the blue, there was a first red flag around 4 o'clock. Reed received a phone call from Oliver's school. Jennifer hadn't come to pick him up. That wasn't like her. She was reliable, punctual Jennifer. He called her cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail, as if she had turned it off. Doubt began to seep in, but Reed went and got Oliver himself, thinking it was just a minor glitch. By the time he returned home, the uneasiness had deepened. The house felt different, quiet, too quiet, really. Jennifer wasn't there. At first, he couldn't understand why. Her car was missing, but why would she leave without telling anyone? Then, Reed noticed something odd in one of the downstairs bathrooms. Jennifer's bag was by the side of the toilet. Not just that, it was open, and its contents didn't make sense. Her wallet, phone, credit cards, and driver's license were gone. Even the toilet seat was up, which was odd, because that bathroom wasn't one they usually used. For one thing, Jennifer hadn't completed her normal chores. Reed's bed was still unmade, which was unusual. Jennifer never left things hanging. Then he noticed something else even weirder. His computer was gone. There were trash bags strewn around the floor of the kitchen, as if Jennifer had interrupted her work. Something felt wrong. Jennifer, with her 2015 Hyundai Santa Fe, was missing. Reed attempted to make sense of what was going on, but nothing was adding up. Time passed, and that sense of dread loomed larger. Finally, shortly before 6:25 that evening, he did call the police. When an officer showed up, Reed told him what he knew. The last he'd heard from Jennifer was earlier that morning, in a text she'd sent him shortly after 11. It hadn't been usual by any means, But as the hours wore on, the silence about her absence grew deafening. The police moved quickly, attempting to locate Robert, Jennifer's husband. He also hadn't heard from or spoken to her either. Jennifer had plans to go to Dallas the following evening to see her son and her newborn granddaughter. It would still be a day, but at the same time, she wouldn't just disappear like this. There were more calls, more questions, but no one had heard or seen Jennifer. Not her kids, not her friends. It was as if she had dropped off the face of the earth. What had begun as an ordinary day was now a mystery. Each small detail, the absence of her car, the purse left behind in the bathroom, the powered-off phone, contributed to a darker portrait. Something horrible had occurred, and it was just the start. But that same evening, when the uncertainty and fear hung thick in the air, Jennifer's husband Robert decided to take matters into his own hands. He combed through bank records, looking for something, anything that could explain her abrupt disappearance. The transactions appeared normal at first sight. At 10:08 that morning, there was a payment to her dental office, just like we expected. But then he spotted something. At 12:10 p.m., $300 was withdrawn from a Wells Fargo ATM, the maximum withdrawal allowed. Robert knew Jennifer. She wasn't the kind of person who took out money like that, and without a reason. The timing also seemed off, and the transaction didn't sit well with him.
Did anyone have permission or authorization from you to withdraw that cash? No. Okay. And in regards to that transaction, would you like to press charges, if applicable, to anyone for criminal charges?
Yes, I would.
It was another piece of a puzzle in a case that was rapidly becoming more disturbing by the hour. He had a glimmer of hope in remembering that Jennifer's vehicle, a 2015 Hyundai Santa Fe, came with a system called BlueLink. The service allowed the owner to remotely monitor the vehicle through a smartphone. If they could trigger it, perhaps it would aid in tracking her SUV, and along with that, a path to follow. But even that lead ran into trouble. It was still registered to the car's previous owners, and without an active account, it was useless. The next morning, Robert hurried to fill out the paperwork to reactivate the service. Reed was, in the meantime, trying to put things together on his end. He had a nagging sense that something was horribly amiss. When he and Oliver had gotten home the night before, he'd noticed a strange detail. The front door had been locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. The person who locked it must have had a key. That little fact gave him chills. Searching through the records of his alarm system, Reed discovered more troubling signs. The system logs didn't align with what should have been a normal day. There were anomalies, doors opening and closing at odd times, movements that didn't seem to add up. It was like someone else had been living in the house, someone who didn't belong. While the investigation had already started shaking out, the disturbing pieces just added to the pressure. Jennifer's car was missing, her phone was off, and now there were questions about who else might have had access to the house. Each detail made the situation increasingly tense. Something or someone had stopped her in her tracks. And whatever had happened next was enough that she left her purse behind, her routine smashed to smithereens, and an unnatural hush over the house, as if the day had frozen in time, and the only one who could explain it was lost. More information began to trickle out as the investigation continued, building new layers to the already horrifying case. Detectives also tracked down Janet Grimm, the contact who had been scheduled to deliver the framed artwork to the house on the day Jennifer went missing. Janet had a disturbing piece of the puzzle. At 10:18 that morning, Jennifer had texted her that she'd be home in under 10 minutes. In that moment, everything felt normal. But soon after that, something strange occurred. By 11:33, Janet saw she had missed several calls from Jennifer's number. When she finally picked up, it was Jennifer on the other end, but not the same Jennifer. She sounded panicked, frantic even. Jennifer said she had to cancel the appointment because the school had called and that some other stuff had come up, and she needed to pick up Oliver immediately. Janet found the conversation disturbing. It didn't make sense. Why was the school even calling her about Oliver when she wasn't due to pick him up until later? So about an hour later, when Janet called back, no one answered. Jennifer's phone was silent. And then there was the breakthrough. Video footage was obtained from the Wells Fargo ATM where $300 had been withdrawn on Jennifer's account earlier that afternoon. The withdrawal had taken place at 12:10 p.m., shortly after the last recorded activity on Reed's alarm system. Everyone thought they would see Jennifer in the footage. What they found instead was much more alarming. The video showed a man. He appeared middle-aged, wearing eyeglasses, his hair in a ponytail, dressed in a white t-shirt, light-colored shorts, and bright blue tennis shoes. A white towel was draped around his neck, and a plaid-banded watch was on his left wrist. It certainly wasn't Jennifer, and whoever this man was, he wasn't hiding. Reed was shown pictures of the man and the unique watch, but he didn't recognize him. The man was a complete stranger, and the weirdness didn't end there. The same man returned to the ATM later that day at 4:33 p.m. This time, he looked different. He was wearing a dark baseball cap that matched his jacket and shirt. But there was something far more sinister than this outfit change. His hands were full of fresh cuts and wounds. It was evident, like he'd been in a fight. Something in the footage stood out to Reed. The shirt looked exactly like one he owned. His same shirt was also gone from his drawers. There was mounting evidence, yet there remained a major puzzle to crack. Who was this man? No record of him exists with state police. How did he gain access? And eventually, what had happened to Jennifer in the hours between her last text and the moment this stranger showed up on camera? Each bit of information moved investigators closer to the truth, yet the answers proved as disturbing as the mystery itself. On September 28th, Jennifer's husband completed the steps necessary to activate the vehicle tracking system, and when the system went online, the SUV appeared in the parking lot of a Publix grocery store just 5 miles from Reed's home. It seemed like a step forward, but what investigators discovered inside the vehicle only amplified the rising fear. The following day, September 29th, the SUV was processed for evidence. On the center console inside the car was a beer bottle. It stood out immediately. Jennifer did not drink on the job. Robert was convinced it was not hers. The mysterious person wasn't trying to blend in or go unnoticed. It was another planned part of that grim puzzle, it felt. There was a tan canvas bag lying on the passenger side floor. When investigators opened it, several items inside caught their attention. A white t-shirt, a white towel, a man's watch that had a distinct plaid band. The mere sight of these things made everyone involved gasp. All of the items also matched what the man in the ATM footage had worn when he was captured on the camera for the first time. But there was a much worse thing. All of it was smeared with blood. They were no longer merely pieces of evidence. They were signs of violence, raw and undeniable. Then, another twist in the case arrived. The same day the SUV was processed, law enforcement was notified of a third, unauthorized ATM withdrawal from Jennifer's account. But this one was not in Winter Park. It was more than 140 miles from there in Jacksonville, Florida. The withdrawal was for $100 on September 29th, 2 days after Jennifer went missing. This new clue led north, far from where it all had begun. That information resulted in a major breakthrough for detectives. They called the Amtrak station in Winter Park to see if they could connect. Their instincts paid off. On September 27th at 4:52 p.m., the day of Jennifer's disappearance, a train ticket to Jacksonville had been bought. That train had a single passenger aboard. With this key detail in hand, detectives finally were able to identify the man seen in the ATM footage. His face had been splashed across the media for days, and now they had a name to go with it: ScottNelson. The man was 53 years old, and a background check turned up a chilling history. Nelson wasn't some random man. He had an extensive criminal record and was on federal probation for armed robbery. This wasn't someone who just happened to fall into Jennifer's life. He was dangerous and calculating and capable of terrifying things. As investigators began putting together a timeline of events, the hope for Jennifer's safe return began to dim. The accumulating evidence, the bloody items found, the suspect transactions, Nelson's violent past told a grim story. And then, if the case didn't already take a devastating turn, the worst news of all arrived the next day. Around noon, detectives homed in on a signal from her cell phone. It was pinging off a tower near a heavily wooded area in Orlando. What ensued was a coordinated search with the assistance of the Orange County Sheriff's Aviation Unit. They finally discovered a devastating discovery: Jennifer's body. The scene was beyond words. What she suffered in her last moments was simply horrific. The violence of the crime left veteran investigators unsettled and spurred them to move with urgency. Jennifer had not only been taken, she had been the victim of something cruel, something that no one deserved. Now that Jennifer's body has been located, the case has turned. It was no longer a search for her alive, but a search for the man behind it so that he didn't escape justice. Local law enforcement authorities and U.S. Marshals stepped up efforts to find ScottNelson, and it didn't take long. It was only the next day, October 1st, that they discovered him. Scott had been staying at a motel called the Sunshine Inn in Jacksonville, just under a mile from where the Amtrak station dropped him after his escape from Winter Park. The site fit the description of a trail investigators had been pursuing. Still, knowing where he was didn't ease the tension. Scott was dangerous, and he would do anything if he got a clue that someone was on his tail. His violent connections and lack of stake in the world left little standing between him and anyone who got in his way, able to turn uncontrollably at any moment. When police got to the motel, Scott wouldn't come out of his room. It was an impasse, and the tension hung heavy. But it didn't last long. Scott initially resisted, but eventually gave in. He exited the room at last, and the officers took him into custody without incident. Scott was calm and collected once taken into custody. He was polite in his conversations with detectives, even unnervingly so. He requested an attorney and appeared to understand exactly how to work the process. He didn't seem rattled or intimidated. This wasn't his first run-in with the law. His assurance of the situation revealed how comfortable he was with being on that side of it.
Can I ask you something?
Yeah, ask away, go ahead.
I'm under arrest.
Yes.
What are my charges?
Okay, right now we got some issues with some credit card use, okay? So I'd like to go into that, all right?
Okay.
And you know, there's always two sides to every story, you understand that? And that's why we're talking to you, because, you know, obviously there's two sides to every story, and I'd like to hear what you have to say
What
about
credit card? Because I don't own a credit card.
Okay. All right, well, we'll get into that in a little bit.
Okay.
Bear with me, let me get through some of this stuff, and then we'll go right into that, okay?
Sure.
All right.
For detectives, it was a frustrating note. They sought answers, but Scott wasn't giving anything away. But the shadow of what he'd done hung over the calm surrender. The bloody garments, the ATM footage, the timeline, it all implicated him. Still, Scott didn't want to talk, and detectives weren't given any clues on what exactly happened.
Well, I mean, what? I don't have enough information. I mean, I
As I said, well, let's walk through it.
Sure, okay.
All right. So, do you have any idea why you think you may be here at all?
No.
No, okay.
Although Scott didn't talk, the evidence against him was good enough to get him sent behind bars, and so he ended up in federal prison. Now, with him behind bars, the immediate danger was behind them, but the pain and devastation he had caused wouldn't fade away so easily. The story of Jennifer Fulford had ended in a heartbreaking way, and now that man was sitting in a cell, awaiting justice. But no one knew about it until one day Scott decided to reveal the truth. ScottNelson was not ready to talk the night he was arrested. He said nothing, unwilling to hand detectives what they wanted, but that silence didn't last. Around a month later, something changed. Suddenly, he wrote a letter to one of the detectives. He then said he wanted to speak, but it was not remorse, not by a long shot. His motivation was not to help Jennifer's family or to do the right thing. He wanted something for himself, period. On November 13th, 2017, a meeting was arranged at the Federal Detention Center in Miami.
It's approximately 10:41 a.m. at FDC in Miami for an interview with Nelson.
I know what you said in the letter, and so I want to go over the letter with you. Like I told you last time, I know there's stuff you want to tell us, and we'll go from there. Okay.
Scott was willing to talk this time. What he revealed wasn't merely horrifying. It demonstrated the sort of coldness and cruelty that only a truly heartless person could inspire. The most shocking part was not even the gruesome details of what he'd done, but why he did it. Scott's words revealed his bitterness and rage. For months, he had fed on resentment, convinced that the world owed him something. He resented other people living comfortably as he struggled to survive. He recounted his life after he was released from prison in May of that year, 4 months before the killing. He'd been homeless, hungry, and bitter. But day after day, he watched people in neighborhoods like Winter Park lead lives of privilege while he subsisted on nothing. It seemed to him a world mocking him.
It wasn't my intent to go around the countryside killing people. I'm out of money, I'm out of gas, that's it. I was hungry. I was starving to death on the streets of Winter Park, one of the richest towns in Florida, hungry. Oh, she'd give the shirt off her back. How many times have I heard that in my life? Oh, I'll do that. That's something people like to get high on. They love doing that. Oh, I'd give the shirt off my back. I'd do this, that, and the other. No, you won't. You'll give just enough so it doesn't hurt. No, people don't give a damn about nobody in this world. They don't care.
Scott was convinced he was entitled to the life those living in Winter Park enjoyed. Luxury, comfort, security. All of it, he believed, should have been his. And when it didn't hand him what he wanted, his anger focused outward.
As far as, what created this whole thing to be, I was thrown to the street again, and I had nowhere to live. I was completely broke. Yeah. And, I had been in Winter Park a few times. Okay, so it wasn't the first time I had been to Winter Park. What happened there was I noticed that it's a very affluent type of place. Yeah. It is. Well, people have a lot of money and things like this, and they have a different lifestyle. Where 15 minutes away in Orlando, where I was living, people are dead ass broke. Yeah. I wasn't particularly happy with this.
Scott possessed a dangerous mix of principles. It wasn't just that he felt entitled to everything. He was out for revenge. For someone such as him, revenge was not a matter of balance. It didn't have to do with an eye for an eye. He was in favor of pain, in retaliating so brutally that no one would dare to cross him again. Whether the offense was real or imagined was immaterial. The abuse was the point. Those in power knew. He said he had nothing to lose. Life outside of prison had proven as cruel as life behind bars. He'd had difficulty looking for food and shelter, and even basic health care. To someone who had spent decades in prison, the brutal reality of the outside world proved to be unbearable. He was cornered, and the only way he could understand the world around him was to respond violently and cruelly. Scott was eerily calm during the interview. It was really no worse than what he'd been up against out there, and maybe even better. What was most striking was Scott's utter lack of remorse. He didn't care what pain he'd inflicted. He didn't perceive Jennifer as a person who had a family or life. For him, she was merely a representation of everything he'd ever wanted but would never attain. And through her, he delivered a muddled message to the world. ScottNelson's account of what transpired in the days before Jennifer Fulford was murdered delivers the inside story of a mind warped by rage, entitlement, and a disconcerting lack of empathy. On September 26th, Scott peeked at Reed Berman's house, and there Jennifer and Oliver appeared.
So I knew that I was going to do that. Okay. I noticed this one house, and it was happened to be 5 o'clock, I'd say 5 o'clock in the afternoon on the 26th. And I see Jennifer getting out of a vehicle with a young boy. Okay. And they go into the house. And I could tell just by the way she was dressed that she was not a The first thing I had in my head was she must be a house cleaner or something of that nature.
Okay.
But I wanted to make an example of Winter Park.
Right.
Okay? Right, wrong, or indifferent, be it evil, be whatever, that's what I was going to do.
In his warped mind, she wasn't someone of value, just a maid or a nanny. That assumption allowed him to dehumanize her more easily and make her the target of his misplaced rage. He chose for her to be the one who would pay for everything he thought the world had taken from him. The day after the day he did the crime, everything he did was calculated. He came into the house to rob and kill. Jennifer attempted to comply, providing him everything he asked for and even give him the PIN number for her ATM card. But Scott became furious when he discovered that she hadn't mentioned a debit card linked to Reed's personal account. Then, despite her cries for mercy, he wrapped Jennifer in a comforter and threw her into the back of her own vehicle. She cried for help, but Scott didn't care. Compassion, he said, was something he no longer had, if he ever had it at all. What ensued was a series of gut-wrenching judgments. Scott drove Jennifer to various locations, stopping at ATMs to withdraw money and plan their next move.
So I went upstairs for a second. I got the brown comforter out of the bed. I wrapped her in the brown comforter and put her in the back of her own vehicle.
Okay.
I loaded her up through the front door, and then I left. So she was in the back of the vehicle, and I left with her.
Okay.
I went to the ATM machine and I withdrew the $300.
According to Scott, he had purchased a knife and some duct tape at Walmart days earlier, planning to use them in a murder. These weren't purchases made on a whim. He had been intending to kill someone all along. Jennifer just happened to be the person who crossed his path. She could not have done anything to change that. Scott later took Jennifer to a wooded area. She knew what was coming and pleaded for her life, but Scott was merciless. He bound her with duct tape, used it to seal her mouth to keep her quiet. To him, she was not a person, but a path to his goal.
I got her out of the vehicle, and she started getting louder and louder, so I put some duct tape.
Could she breathe with the tape
Barely.
put on her face?
Very little. Now she's pleading for her life.
Did you ever hit her in the head, or did she ever hit her head on the ground or anything like that?
Back of her head?
Yeah.
Yes, I punched her.
When?
Prior to duct taping her up. I stabbed her 3 times that I didn't remember.
Remember where?
Yeah, once in the back, another time in the back, and then the third time I was walking away, and I thought to myself, you know what? I'm not going to let this testify against me.
Then, Scott cleaned himself at a Publix bathroom. He put on clean clothes and continued his day as if nothing had occurred. He even celebrated with a pizza and a beer at a 7-Eleven, relishing a warped sense of satisfaction.
Well, I called it the blood pizza.
Okay.
Because the reason why I called it that is because I ordered the pizza, I bought a beer with the highest level of grace that I could muster. I was actually proud of what I did because of that. After all the years that I've been kicked in the face by the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and all the years that not attaching my colostomy, and all the years of getting beat up and tormented and everything, I finally had a certain level of self-respect. I finally made someone pay for all that I've been through. And so I took my blood pizza because somebody died for me to get this pizza.
To him, the meal was not merely sustenance. It signified his triumph over the universe that had let him down. He considered himself a man who had finally exerted his will, when really, he was just a rampaging bull. Walking the streets of Winter Park with the room service plates of his beer and pizza in his neatly buttoned shorts and khakis made him feel vindicated as he passed by those enjoying the life that he felt he deserved. That moment in his mind he had gotten, regardless of the terrible price. He liked the idea of the community's safety being disrupted, their peace stolen, just like he felt his had been. Scott confessed to the murder, but shifted responsibility, saying his probation officer and the federal system had forced his hand. He felt that he had been set up to fail, and in his warped rationale, that redeemed his behavior.
They really had a notion in their head that they wanted to destroy this guy, send him back to prison. I mean, that's what they do. I mean, they have certain individuals. Oh, of course they do. And things started adding up. I had all I could take, and it just something happened to me that I just couldn't take it anymore. I'm hungry. I'm a felon. I'm homeless. I did everything I could to abide by the law. Yeah. They're going to put me in prison anyway. The bottom line is this, is that my probation department, the feds, they put me in this situation as well as those people, the Federal Bureau of Prisons.
He even offered to confess to other crimes, including bank robberies and 8 other homicides, in return for a little more food in prison. It was a further demonstration of how little he cared for human life as compared with his own comfort. Scott testified at his trial, recounting Jennifer's final moments in gruesome detail and blaming everyone and everything except himself. Despite his blood-curdling admissions, he did not get the death penalty he said he wanted. Instead, the jury convicted him on all counts, including first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For Jennifer's family and the Winter Park community, there was no real justice in this outcome. The loss of Jennifer, a caring and loving human being, was incalculable. Scott's crime was no mere attack on one person. It was an act of terror that left scars on everyone who knew her. The only comfort was that he would never be free again, and his final days would be spent within the confines of a jail where he would pay for his sins for the rest of his mortal life.